What kind of advice would you give to those people to be able to keep that positive mindset and find the solution to be able to get out of it?
When things can go wrong, people really stick their head in the sand.
Do you think it's harder for us for the next generation to understand the importance of money?
People don't start this journey to being financially secure or independent because they're scared, or they're not confident, or they think you need $1 million to start, but that's just not true.
Welcome, I'm Tracy Irwin and I'm passionate about financial independence and wanted to share stories of inspiring entrepreneurs to prove it's possible for everyone to strive towards financial freedom. Today, I'm talking to Genene Wilson. She is a woman who's not afraid to have the real conversations about money and about life. She's Australia's prosperity queen, a life-changing women's financial expert, having helped thousands of people, especially women, untangle their money stories. She's here today to chat to us about all her twists and turns, and it has been a roller coaster. You're going to really, really enjoy this, and what she turns even experts face. So, Genene, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tracy. It's really lovely to be here and finally get to meet and chat face to face, because I've admired you from afar. Let's
Oh,
go,
thank
just
you.
go with
That's
that.
really kind. So we're on totally different timelines here. I'm at 9:30 in the morning. What time are you on?
Oh, I think 5:30, 6 p.m. So it's
Excuse
in
me.
the evening.
Not too bad then. So please,
Yeah.
please tell everyone what your journey looked like to financial independence for yourself.
So look, the reason, can I just start with this? The reason I wanted to chat with you, Tracy, is because so often I read about, financial advisors, and certainly I've worked with those snooty financial advice types that, worked in London and wear black pinstripe suits and all of that. But it's like they're on a pedestal and they're not human, and they never make mistakes. Well, that's just not life, is it really? And so I wanted to share my story because, as you say, it has been one bumpy ride, even from someone who just loves to plan stuff. I don't see what's happened in my financial situation as a mistake, but certainly there's some really strong lessons to learn on the way to financial independence. So I'm happy to share my story. So let me start with, I've been married for 43 years to my beautiful husband, Nick,
Congratulations.
and it's, divorces here in Australia, half of them end in divorce. Sorry, marriages end in half of them end in
Wow.
divorce. So, I feel pretty chuffed about that.
Yeah, you should.
Again, we've worked on it, we've planned and so on. But we've worked hard and we've enjoyed the fruits of our labor. We've had holidays and, we've been pretty responsible financially, raised our family and had some great holidays and all of the stuff that really makes life worth living. But life tends to get in the way sometimes. And so throughout our marriage, health and wellness has really got in our way quite a lot. And so it's really thrown us some curveballs. And I just wanted to talk about that for a minute because some of the costs of our of our health issues have been eye-watering financially. I think you'd agree,
Yes,
Tracy.
I've read your story, Genene. It is eye-watering. And the health the health system is slightly different in Australia, isn't it, to the UK? So
Yeah.
kind
Yeah,
of
we've got a really good retirement savings system. We've got a really good health system, and we've paid our health insurance premiums, but
yeah.
still we have what's called gap or out-of-pocket expenses, and those out-of-pocket expenses are extraordinary. And look, as a financial expert, with my background being in financial advice and a CPA by occupation, it's unbelievable that, the things I advocated for my clients, I did myself,
Yeah.
but it still wasn't enough. And so I think that's one of the main things. Like I've always advocated for people to have buffers for emergencies and, make sure that they're thinking about that. We can never pre-plan for when an emergency happens or an accident happens and so on. And so, we're not talking a few dollars here. We're not talking $100. Start with 100, but build it up to 1,000 and 10,000. And, as it turns out, I might have needed 100,000. But anyway, um, you know, build up over time. But about 20 years ago, my husband Mick had a really big medical episode and he needed extensive dental work. And back then, it cost us around $80,000. Now, I should have probably worked out, Tracy, what that is in today's money, but it's a lot of money, you know, a lot of money. And when I looked at it, that would probably have been at that time nearly both of our incomes for a year if we did nothing else but pay for that dental work. And look, I remember at the time, I was telling someone this story just yesterday. He was sitting in the chair at the prosthodontist, and he delivered the news that it was going to cost, somewhere between 60 and $80,000. And my husband had his hand on his chair, and he dove up out of the chair as he was about to leave the room. And I said, you might want to just sit back down because that sounds pretty cheap compared to a divorce. Let's just say that he had the dental work, but that was the first big expense. I also have beautiful teeth. Look at that smile.
You do?
My dental work in about 2015 cost around $70,000. And this is Australian money. That's a lot of money. Even then, that was a lot of money in 2015, round there. And, I've had spinal surgery. I got sick just as I started my business back in 2018. And so that cost a lot of money at the time. Again, those out-of-pocket expenses, that 10 grand here, that 2 grand there, it cuts a big hole in your savings bucket
It
and or
isn't
your
just the
emergency
actual,
fund.
it isn't just the money either, is it? It's the
Oh, the
time that you
time.
can't work and create more money. So you're not, those buffers aren't just like allocations for the actual treatment that you need, but it has to keep you going whilst you can't work as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah, you
yeah,
need the lights on, you need the roof over the
yes,
head, you
yeah, of
need the food
course.
on the table. And so those buffers are so important. I can't impress on people that enough. And, just as I was recovering from that spinal surgery, I was diagnosed with two other autoimmune illnesses and ended up on chemotherapy. And again, just money is flying out the door on medical costs. And COVID is what COVID was here in Australia. I think we didn't lose as many people as the rest of the world,
Yeah.
but it was still devastating financially. I mean, businesses are still suffering. Businesses shut their doors. There was so much suffering in the community because there was kind of the haves and the have-nots. If I, I think it created in my mind this sort of notion of two-speed economy, Tracy, right? Because some people had government jobs and could immediately just keep going from home and all of that sort of thing. I was probably in my business fortunate to the extent that I'd already done a lot of my work online, so I was already probably 60% online anyway, talking to people around the country. So I was probably lucky, but some of my friends and colleagues not so. If you had a job where you had to show up like a restaurant or a coffee shop or Kmart, Walmart, Tesco, whatever that is, you were really suffering and times were really tough. And to my mind, people haven't necessarily recovered financially. I know so many people who haven't. Just as we started to feel pretty good financially again in 2024, we'd booked a few holidays. We were starting to really enjoy ourselves. I was doing some speaking gigs on cruise ships so that, I could talk about money and life and we could combine that with a bit of pre-retirement planning and all of this sort of thing. So life was sitting pretty good. And my husband got diagnosed with cancer. And so, we were really fortunate. It was a rare cancer. We caught it really quickly. But again, this money out the door all the time. You really eat into those buffers. And then obviously, Tracy, I'm an author, your listeners may not, but we just planned on a trip over to the USA and through Europe. We did a bit of a world trip. So we'd, saved up our money and, off we were going. And we were actually sitting over in Europe and my husband said to me, "What's that on my face?" This was in March, April 25. My husband said, "Oh, what's that on my face?" I said, "I don't know, but it looks a bit funny." So we got home and straight back up to the doctors, and he has another diagnosis of cancer. So, I got the I got the quotes for the surgeon and all of that, and he's had the tumor removed, but tens of thousands of dollars later. And, I think it cost us about 10 or 15 grand, and we got 2 grand back. The rest was our gap payment. And, now we just got the bill for the oncologist for the radiation treatment, $22,000. And I'm just sitting there
Wow.
going, you know what? Each and every step of the way of these really kind of big medical incidences has been tens of thousands of dollars. And I think, many people might have no buffer. Some people might have $10,000 in a buffer, but man, you can need a lot more. And it's totally unexpected, in my case, off the charts.
Yeah, definitely. How do you, your mindset must be so good because that, like, how many times it was like, how many times does this need to happen? And yet you're still smiling, you're still happy, you're like so bubbly. How do you cope the mindset of having that? Because it must be difficult at certain times.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad you raised that because I really feel like I've been in the doldrums, if we can put it that way. My
Okay.
business has stopped. My husband is my number one priority, as you would expect.
Yeah.
My days and his, we feel like we're in one of the big department stores. They've got those rotating doors you walk through. We feel like we're in this rotating door of medical appointments. I look at my diary now. It used to be filled with client meetings and catch ups with friends and networking and coffee dates and
Yeah.
lunches and things like that. And now it's just filled with oncologist, dietitian, physio, physical therapist. You just look in the diary, it is just full of medical treatments. And you're right, it can really bring you down. But, I think I have this awareness that I'm going to say that a positive mindset is really necessary to get you through the tough times. And I think throughout my career, and I draw on this really strongly, I had a lot of strength in my positive mindset and my whole solutions mode. When things happen, I kind of go into solution mode. I listen very carefully, I analyze very carefully, but I'm in solutions. I can, if plan A fails, let's look at plan B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and until I get to Z,
Yeah.
I'm not defeated.
Wow.
It's a shame I wasn't a sports person because I might have earned trillions of dollars selling shoes or something like that. I
Oh,
think it's so important to recovery, particularly in health matters, that positive outlook, and it's really difficult to achieve. You're absolutely right. But I think at the same time, what I've found is important is having that support network around you, consulting with professionals, having your own view of the world, taking the advice that you need at the time that you need it, having that love and care and attention of the people around you has been really important, Tracy, to be
yeah, I can
truthful.
imagine. So,
Mm.
what advice would you give to anybody else who's really struggling? Like their buffers may not be needed for medical care, but there is people out there that look at the debt that they're in and think, how do I get out of this? What kind of advice would you give to those people to be able to like keep that positive mindset and find the solution to be able to get out of it?
Yeah, look, I think from my observation, and this is working with, thousands of clients over the last 3 decades or more, as well as my own experience, when things can go wrong, you can really, I don't know if this is a term, a phraseology that you might use, Tracy, but people really stick their head in the sand,
Yes, we do.
right?
We
So
do.
they stick their head in the sand. I've seen it time and time again. And what I would encourage people to do is pull your head up out of the sand. And, it takes a lot of bravery to take that first step or ask that first person for that bit of help.
Yes.
I need some help. Could you help me? I think that particularly in Australia, there's a bit of a negative view on it, like, oh, somebody's, can't stand on their own 2 feet or, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But when you need help, you need help. I mean, here in Australia, we've got a rising issue because of economic times we're in, with people living in their cars and kids couch surfing or living on the streets and, women 55 or 65, homeless is a really, raging
Wow.
growing population. It's so sad. but I think it is that take that first action
Yeah.
to say, I need some help.
Yes.
And from that, people might say no. I guess as I said that, I went, wow, what if somebody said no? How will I feel? Again, I mentioned earlier, I'm somebody who goes from plan A to Z.
Exactly.
Like,
Just make you just go to the next plan.
go to the next person. Use your voice. You use every tool in your toolbox
Yeah.
to do that, because I mean Australia is probably like the rest of the world, that there's also a lot of people committing suicide, and you look at their life and without judgment say, how could we as a society and humanity have let that happen?
I
Why did it
totally.
happen? And often it's because they didn't open their mouth and say those first very, very difficult words.
Yeah, it is. And I think some people feel that people are going to look down on them, judge them,
Mm,
but actually there is so many people who want to help, and it might not be financially, it might be with advice to kind of help, and it's something that's not, it doesn't have to cost the other person physical money. It could be that it's just a way out. And it's tough because sometimes when negative things happen to us, we're so involved in it that sometimes people do struggle to find that solution. Like you've got a really positive mindset, and not everyone has that. But yeah, it's so sad that every time I read that anyone has died from suicide, it's my heart thinks, how did it get that bad? How did
mm,
they feel that that was the only way, that they didn't feel that they had other way out? And that's for
yeah.
me. I always feel I wish they'd come to me. I wish
Yeah.
they'd just,
I wish, Tracy, I'm with you. I wish there was more kindness in the world.
yeah,
Why aren't we more approachable? Why can't we, are we so caught up in our own shit
yes,
that we
yeah,
don't see that? People need help. Not everyone needs help. Help when you can, but
yes,
offer help when you can.
yeah. I think it is about
Um,
kindness, isn't
ask
it? Definitely.
ask for help when you need it. Obviously, we've got here in Australia this Are You Okay? And it used to be just once a year, but that isn't enough.
No.
Things, you can't turn on the TV without riding a roller coaster. I got back to the word roller coaster. You ride a roller coaster of emotions just watching the nightly news. And
Don't
that's what
watch the
life can be like. It's
no.
really torrid times, I feel. And, that little bit of kindness, you can't always help with money. And I mentioned before that I do some speaking gigs on cruise ships. And I
Yeah, can you tell
remember
me
one
more?
particularly important conversation I had with, an audience of 500 people. But it was about, you can't always help with money, and sometimes you don't want to. I've got an adult son. I might think, well, why can't he stand on his own 2 feet? But sometimes you do need that little bit of help, and particularly now. And I suggested this to some people on this in this talk, and some of those people came to me afterwards and went, we never thought of that. People have got a mortgage to pay, they've got life insurance, they've got all of these things. How would you feel if your child or somebody died as a result of suicide or a work accident or something else, and they had to let their life insurance go, and now they've got a family that has, not a very good, strong financial future because the premium wasn't paid. I said, go to your family and say, listen, we don't want to give, we don't want to give it all away, but if you need a little bit of help, like we can pay your mortgage this month, or we could pay your rent this week, or I can pay that life insurance premium. If nothing else, I want your family to be protected if something goes wrong.
Yeah, I
And,
think that's
I
really good
think that
advice.
is just really from the heart. People always talk to me about legacy, and I speak a lot about creating a legacy. But a legacy to me is actually championing this notion of kindness and caring and helping where you can and teaching the next generation of what, fiscal responsibility is and how you can help people learn about it and actually act on it and do it and be that, champion that in the kids, and, we'll be better in the long run.
Definitely. Are you working harder than ever? but feeling like you're getting nowhere. You're not alone. Most business owners I speak to feel trapped in their own success, working 60 hours plus a week, missing family time, and honestly, they're not even sure why they feel so stuck. They just know something needs to change. If this sounds familiar, I've created a quick quiz to help you find out why you feel stuck in your business. It takes only 2 minutes and I give you clarity on exactly what's keeping you trapped and, more importantly, how to break free. The link's in the description, so why not take it now? Do you think it's harder for us for the next generation to understand like the importance of money because we don't see it anymore? So because everything's online and it's all just numbers, like when I was a kid, I got pocket money. I got money in my hand. I'd done my chores, or like when I was a little bit older, I started a paper round. Like I physically had money in my hand. So when I went to a shop, it meant something. Whereas now I look at my grandchildren and like they'd have never, like they don't know the difference between a 2 pence or a £2 coin. Like they don't, it's kind of strange. And I just wondered, from your point of view, how much harder is it for us to teach children the value of money now when everything's so digital?
I couldn't agree with you more, Tracy. And I talk a lot about this tap, tap, tap society, but I do just want to make something silly, a little silly joke. I didn't know £2 was a coin. Just putting it out there.
Amazing. Show you a
Now I know.
show you a €2 coin, but I don't have any £2.
So look, it is, you're absolutely right. That children don't get that same experience. It's just a tap, tap, tap society, or you order something online and you pay for it online, and it's kind of out there in the ether, if I can put it that way. And there are really some important milestones in my mind of teaching kids about money. And in fact, my young grandson has just started working in his first job. He's in the family business, and he was here today. He's had his tech day of learning about trees because he's going to be an arborist.
Oh,
But so
nice.
he's come here, and I said, okay, so now all the figures should be in for the tax return. You're going to have to go and find an accountant and, do your tax return, and you'll need to tell them, this was how much I earned and this is how much tax I paid and these are my deductions and all. And it was a couple of minute conversation, just that little tiny little lesson in 1 minute. It wasn't a lecture, it wasn't judgy, it was just, oh, you might not know this.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think part of our society maybe don't. I mean, without judgment, many people, you know, parent from their telephone with it in front of their face, or, kids who are living on the street, they're not learning those sorts of things. But, me telling my grandson that today, and hopefully he can share that with his other mates at tech, or, whatever, his girlfriend and her family or whomever, that how are young people going to learn if we're not willing to teach them in a way that they can hear it?
Yes.
But even going to the supermarket, I mean, here in Australia, and I'm sure it's the same the rest of the world, there's always a few sweets or something at the checkout, something small. Give them a coin to, they can feel special and memorable. Tracy, when I was a kid, we used to have to walk from our home to the local pool, and we'd go, my brother, sister, and I'd go, and it was a bit of a distance, and it was kind of remote, and it was really, really hot, as you could well imagine, on a 40-degree day in Western Sydney, out there walking to the pool. And we'd get a cent to get in and 2 cents to spend, and we just kind of get, a lolly each or something like that. And those memories, all these years later, and I'm not going to say how many years later, but it's a lot, decades later, those memories stick with you. And I think, that my family didn't have much, and I think it taught me a lot about being fiscally responsible, right?
Yeah.
And I think people don't start this journey to being financially secure or independent because they're scared, or they're not confident, or they think you need $1 million to start. But that's just not true, right?
Really isn't true.
Not true at all. You can start with a couple of dollars. And, young people, I would encourage them from their first pay packet when they've got their first job, put away 20%. That's $20 in $100.
Yeah.
What do you really, if you're living at home, you've probably got that bit of extra money, but that's how you start saving. Just start small, even if it was $1 or £1 in your case, just start.
Yeah.
Actually, is the way to go. And you don't need $1 million to go out and buy your first property, or, you can buy a share on the stock market for really tiny little amounts. Start somewhere. It's the act of starting. And
It
it's the
is the
same as
act.
that whole thing around mindset and, having a positive mental attitude. You can nurture that in yourself.
Definitely. And I think it becomes a routine. If you can make it a habit that when you get your
Absolutely.
paycheck or any invoice, that a certain percentage goes to saving for your future, however that be, retire, like pension, stocks and shares, and whatever you want to put it into, then
Yeah.
actually life becomes so much easier because it compounds over time. So if you're the younger, like that's that old saying, isn't it? The best time to start saving was 20 years ago, but the second best time is tomorrow. It's
Yeah.
kind of
Or,
like,
or today.
or today, yeah, today even. And it's kind of, and there's lots of places people can go nowadays, like from the internet, to be able to find how, what kind of investment they want, how do they want to become secure. And it doesn't take $1 million. It doesn't even take $100, like $100,000. It just takes that few dollars every time to be compounded to actually make us secure as we get older. I think people start too late, don't they? They start to get into like midlife and think, oh,
Oh,
maybe I should have done something about this sooner.
the number of people that come to me in their 50, when I was licensed financial advisor, come to me in their 50s or 60s or 70s, and, what can I do? Is it too late? Well, you know, there is this thing that is it ever too late? Is it never too late? Well, sometimes it is, but look, I've helped people make big life changes financially in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s. And some of that is that you don't know what you don't know. So getting professional advice can be super important but again, finding the right person that can meet your needs. I talk a lot about that as well, Tracy, because there's a lot of people out there talking about money and they might only be one step ahead of you. And maybe that's helpful to you, but sometimes they haven't seen through different cycles, the economy and how money and investments move and change. And so they can't really guide you on what to expect. And so, if you don't know what to expect, then you can't really make an informed decision about what risks you're taking. And so we talked a moment ago about, start somewhere, save some money, maybe buy a share or buy a house, depending, but there's risks with all of these types of investments.
Yeah.
So, fundamental is just start. You've got to have a little bit of money, a little pool of money to start with. So start with a little bit of saving. And then when you come to investing, learn about investing and decide how much risk you want to put in the table. I've worked with people who want almost no risk, but want really high returns. How unrealistic. That doesn't exist. I don't know about you. I've never come across that
Oh, I was
investment
just
that
about to
is
say, can I
zero,
have some
zero,
advice on that, please?
zero risk and 100%
Zero risk
reward,
with
double
no
your money.
return. Yeah.
That's not investing, Tracy. I'm just going to tell you that as you know is called gambling.
Yes.
But understand the risks, learn about investing, learn from reliable sources, challenge people on what they're telling you so that until you do understand. When people came to me when I was financial advising, I didn't want to just say, oh, here you are, here's your plan, off you go. I liken it a bit to that whole financial advice piece, and learning and education must be incorporated into that. That's a little bit of like, designing a house. If we think about you want to build a house, you're building your money house.
Yep.
Start with what's underlying it. You might put some piers in the ground, then you're going to lay the foundation, then you're going to have some emergency buffers and your estate plan and all of that sort of stuff sitting there on the ground floor, and then you're going to build the top floor, which is all this more sexy stuff like investing and your retirement savings and using debt to build more assets, and all of these things have got pros and cons. But don't blindly go into them. So you're designing your house through this planning phase, and then coming to building it, you don't go and get the designer of the plan to be building the house generally. You're going to have a contractor that builds the house, right? So, think of it in that way. You need this information, you need the plan, you need to start somewhere, and then over here you're going to start to actually build that home, and you're going to start to build your wealth and build your financial security.
I
Does that make
love that.
sense?
I love that analogy. No, I really do love it because, like, when I talk about money metrics, I talk about it being the foundation of a business. Like, so many people try to throw like marketing or taking on a team as the answer to growth, where actually, if the business isn't financially viable, you throw money at these kind of things, you're just going to go bust sooner. And it's kind of like, so I use the foundation for the money metrics for people
Yeah.
to understand that that's what once that's sorted, then throw as much money as you want at marketing because you know that your foundations are safe. And I think that analogy has worked really well for what you've just said as well.
Mhm.
Genene, please tell me more about your books because I know you've done 5 already. I feel proud of myself for just the one. So,
And look, you know, just before I move to that, because I really want to talk about that as well, Tracy,
yes.
but I've worked with a lot of business folks, and I think here in Australia in particular, and from my experience, lots of business folks, build businesses and it's a fast track to going broke, as you said,
Yep.
because they don't understand the numbers, they don't understand the metrics of the business, and they, get carried away with, chasing the goose that
More
laid the
sales.
golden egg, right? Instead of focusing in on what is actually going to make me money. And, I'm actually teaching, I'm in a family business with my son and daughter-in-law and his family, and there's multiple 3 generations in our business. And so I'm teaching them to build a better business.
Awesome.
And what's so important there is, growth for growth's sake isn't great,
No.
that you need to understand how that's happening, and you only really want to do profitable growth, because unprofitable growth is just a fast track to going broke.
It is. It really, really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. And then once you're profitable, you actually need to, and this might be different in the rest of the world, but here in Australia, you need to be able to extract some of that wealth you've built up in that business into your own hands in a tax effective way and invest it to build your personal wealth, because that's where it's really at.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
But books.
Go
So
on, yeah, please tell me.
the first 3 books I did is, I've always had a real passion for writing. I just love it, and I love sharing.
Your business is successful, so why do you feel so miserable? Here's the thing, success doesn't always automatically equal freedom. I see profitable business owners every day who can't take a holiday, who can't switch off, and they feel completely overwhelmed by their own achievements. Sound familiar? Well, I've created a simple quiz that pinpoints exactly why you feel stuck in your business. It will give you the clarity you need to move from being trapped to being free. Why don't you take the quiz now? The link's in the description below.
I'm not sure if you can tell that about me already, but I love sharing different stories about my own personal experiences. And, to some extent, I haven't shared a lot about my life because maybe that's for another book. But it's really, so I'm pleased you asked me to share this because, as I said at the outset, people have this whole notion that you're an expert. You must never have made a misstep.
Yeah.
But so the books are around, the first 3 were really in a series of books called Feminescence, and I was a co-author in those books, and just chapters talking about my experience of building a business and, this whole idea of money mindset and how to go about, nurturing that in yourself and then sharing it with other people, and how you nurture and show leadership in your business, that sort of thing. They were great books. I really enjoyed writing them, and I met some fantastic people in doing so, my co-authors, cohort, and we've, developed some great relationships and some great little business partnerships with those people. And then the most recent book, which is why I actually went to the USA and then thought, oh, I'm just a stone throw from Europe. We'll just do a little bit of a world tour off the back of that. Yeah, was to launch a book in Times Square, which was fantastic fun. That book is called Impact, and that again brought together 43 authors, I think, talking about what it means to leave an impact in the world. And so, for my part in that book, I really wanted to talk about championing leadership, how you master your skills, how you can, pass those along, champion that in different generations. And, those, it was so important, the importance of giving. And not necessarily charitable giving, but giving of yourself to help people in the future and, make a change in the world. When I was working as a financial advisor, I always loved to give people advice that would really change their world. And I got case study after case study of that. But I just wanted to talk about it, in a more general way of how you can nurture that in yourself and nurture that in others. So it was a really interesting time to do that. My next book, which is just about to be launched in August, so next month,
Exciting
is
time.
around, and having been married for 43 years, people go, why did you write a book about that? I wrote a book about divorce because I was
Oh, okay.
working a lot with people who were going through divorce, and I'm sure it's probably pretty similar in the rest of the world, but financially, divorce and separation could be really harmful. Not even to mention that whole, mindset piece and, how you can feel, fall into a deep, dark hole going through it and that, leave you with trauma that you've got to deal with. Financially, it can be really harmful. And so, understanding how to go through the process, how to gather up the information you're going to need, how to negotiate. I've had clients that I've worked with to understand what the best case scenario might be when going into court or mediation. What's the best, the middle ground, the worst case. I've had clients ring me desperate, going, "Oh my God, I'm here, and we looked at the worst case. It's half of the worst case. What will I do?"
Yeah,
So all of that negotiation stuff, just talking through it, preparedness is really important when it
yeah.
comes to that. So my next book is around living well as you go through separation and divorce, how to handle it, what sort of things you should be thinking about. And it is from a financial perspective, because I'm sure there's lots of people out there who are, helping people with the trauma of going through it. But I wanted to talk about it from the financial point of view. So that's the next book. And beyond that, the book that's in the pipeline currently is really talking about how you can be substantially better off in. I'm playing with the working title, Tracy. It's pretty much the idea behind it was, how much better off would you be financially in 1 year's time if you just did one small thing every week
Love that. I
towards your financial
absolutely.
well-being? Like, so, so the idea behind the book is really that there was a cycling team who got, just tried every time they went out, 1% better, get 1% better. And it's that kind of underlying notion of just getting a little bit better every single time. Do one small thing for your financial well-being each and every week, and it doesn't have to feel difficult. You just have to start. You're really building in that notion of habit that we talked about earlier. So you're creating this financial discipline. You're looking at your own financials. You're starting to build up your own goals and planning. You're understanding where you're at. You're understanding where you want to be. You're starting to develop this notion of, how am I going to get there?
Yeah.
Which is always a big question, isn't it? But actually achieving it and making things better in not just your personal life, but also in business. I talk a little bit about business in that. So, yeah, that's kind of the next book that's in the pipeline. But my passion project, and I haven't written this yet. I promised myself that when the time was right, I would write the book something along the lines of the truth behind the truth, right? Because
Yeah,
I
okay.
think people see us and they go, "Oh, wow, they're whatever their judgment tells them," right?
Yes.
But there's always some truth behind the story that's never really told. You see
I
what
agree.
people want you to see, what you put forward to the world. It's, one of the reasons I came to talk to you today, Tracy, was because I wanted people to understand there's always a truth behind the truth. It's sometimes hard to understand, or I keep on smiling, I keep having a positive attitude, I'm an optimistic person, but there's been some really tough times.
can
and
imagine.
I want people to know that. And
Yeah.
so that book is around that truth behind the truth. So
Right.
you're actually helping me out today because I'm getting to feel a bit more confident about sharing that with the world.
Yeah, there's accountability for you there, Janine. I'm
I've
gonna
said
tick
it now,
up.
I've got to do it.
I just want to share a story that actually like shows the truth between both of the books, the one that's just about to come out and the new one. So like in 2016, so this is the story I tell people, by the way, and there is truth behind this truth. So like I woke up head of a very successful business. I had employees, town centre premises, I had the nice house, the big car, the lovely holidays. I wasn't happy. I was the first
Mm.
person in the morning. I was the last person out. I created work as my safe space because I wasn't happy at home. And I found it really difficult to actually articulate that because I felt ungrateful. I had a life that many, many people would want, but
Oh, they'd envy it.
yeah, but so it's like, how do you say that? But then my granddad passed, and it wasn't a tragedy because he was 94, but it was a switch. This doesn't happen to everyone who gets a divorce, but within a year, I had processed the entire business to run without me. I got a divorce, and with 2 suitcases, I moved to Spain. And it's like people hear that story, but there's a truth behind that. Like, I particularly don't want to speak about my ex-husband in that because there's my truth, there's his truth, and then
Oh,
there's the actual
absolutely.
truth. And as much as, like, our separation was quite easy, by the way, because the ages that we'd met to the ages we separated, our money wasn't entangled in each other's, so it was quite clean, and I'm very grateful for that, to be honest. But the embarrassment that came from
Mm.
being, I was in Barrow, I was a big fish in a little pond, and like everyone knew my business. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed. My marriage didn't even last 4 years. And with that embarrassment, I created a new life and moved to Spain. There's a lot of stuff I don't tell about that story. So it's true.
Mm.
Like, one, yes, it's like people do crazy things when they get a divorce, by the way. But second, there's always a different story behind that stuff that people don't tend to share on a regular basis because it's their story.
Yeah.
It's theirs to say.
I'm just going to tell you a funny little thing that came into my mind then. It's like a wedding cake. They're beautifully iced, aren't they? They're so
Yeah.
decorative. They're absolutely magnificent. But have you ever seen a fruit cake uniced? They're hideously ugly, right? So there is this beautiful, beautiful thing that the world sees, your relationship that creates this envy.
Yeah.
But the truth behind that can be really ugly. And I mentioned the Truth Behind the Truth book was my passion project, but I promised myself I wouldn't do that until, no one who was involved in any of that ugly stuff would find
Yes.
pain from it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally understand that. Totally. I need to tell you a
Mm.
funny story about my own wedding cake. It should have been a red flag because we got like, so our wedding cake was 3 tiers. It was, I think it was just chocolate on the bottom, lemon drizzle in the middle, and then the fruitcake because neither of us liked fruitcakes. We got the fruitcake for the top. And it was nice 3 tiers. And then my mum, bless her, she went to pick it up. And on the way up to the hotel where we got married, it had bumps in the road. And when my wedding cake came out of the box, the second tier had fallen into the third tier. She was devastated, bless her.
It
And it
just went
really
poof,
was
poof,
like,
poof.
yeah. And the chef at the actual venue was managed to save like the first tier and the second tier. So everyone on my wedding saw this beautiful 2 year tier cake. But there was a bit in the background in the kitchen that was absolutely
Just
everywhere, crushed,
destroyed.
destroyed.
Yeah,
It still tasted the same, but it was tasted
I'm
really nice.
sure.
But yeah, and it just made me think when you said about the wedding cakes. I'm like, yeah, maybe I should have known from that day.
Yeah. Look, my wedding, I look back at it now, and my husband was never liked by my parents.
Okay.
43 years down the line, I'm still married. My
Yeah.
brother and sister married people that my parents absolutely adored and held in the highest esteem, and they've both been married and divorced. And, look, marriage, you need to work at it. I've done the work, right?
Yeah.
We've worked it out. We've done the work, but I find it a little bit amusing. And my mother died last year, and
Sorry to
she
hear
had
that.
Alzheimer's, and it was just such a blessing that she could escape that hell of Alzheimer's. It was not a good version, if such a thing exists. It was a hideously ugly version. But in those dying 12 months or so, where it became really bad and she was in the nursing home, she fell in love with my husband.
Oh,
He got a reprieve.
yeah.
It was,
Oh,
and what a nice story. Like, he
that
just, after
is.
all these years, he just feels really good about the fact that, it came good in the end,
You
because
have
she
your
could just
judgment
see
left.
that devotion. She could actually see and feel that devotion, and verbalize that, I guess, is
That
what you would say. But so
that is a
that was
lovely
lovely.
story. And thank you for sharing it. And thank you for being here. So just one last thing, Genene, where can people find you? Where can they find your books? Where can they find you if they want to have a chat?
So the books are on Amazon, under Feminescence is
Yeah,
the brand. You can probably put this in the show
I will
notes,
put it in the show
Tracy.
notes.
That impact book, it's also on Amazon, and my new book will be on Amazon as well. It's not out yet. It will be out
Okay.
in August.
Yeah, I was gonna
My
say I'll put that
website is
underneath the
GeneneWilson.com. My business website is finesseadvisors.com. And I also have Her Wealth Builder. So you can look up Her Wealth Builder on Instagram, find me on Facebook, and all over the place. Hopefully you can find me somewhere. But if anyone wants to contact me directly, they can do that. Just drop me a line at hello@GeneneWilson.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time this evening for you. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
You did.
Thank you for watching to the end. I really appreciate it, and it shows that you are serious about moving your business forward. I want to share something with you. When I was little, I watched my mum skip meals so my brother and I could eat, because she didn't have enough money to feed us all. That pain changed everything. I promised myself I would never need to rely on anyone else financially. I worked relentlessly towards financial independence. Even as a young parent of 19, I still worked. And once I achieved financial independence, I became passionate that everyone deserves the same. But here's what I've discovered. Successful business owners can feel financially trapped, just in a different way. And that's why I created the Money Metrics Academy, to help you understand your essential business numbers in under an hour a week. No jargon, no overwhelm, just the clarity you need for true financial independence. Why not join the free entry-level membership and see how the community can help you? Let's get unstuck together.